everyone. Welcome to the third episode of Let's Talk Racism. We are your hosts, Rachel,
Sophia,
Jenny,
and Renee.
And as many of you know, racism has been a big issue all around the world.
It has been a heavy year because of the murder of George Floyd. People have taken to the streets and to social media to express their anger.
maybe you have felt sad, angry, anxious, confused, which is why we felt it was so important to continue our conversation about racism by starting our podcast. We'll be having a speaker come on to our podcast every week to share their experiences and knowledge on racism.
Our guest today is Alexandra Smalls. She's an actor, writer, director, content creator, and educator who uses her artistic talents as a tool for activism and as a passion for social justice. She will be sharing her thoughts, experiences today, as well as what she does to make a change. How are you? How has been your day so far, Jessica?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me today. I actually just got to my friend's place in Rhode Island to spend some time with her after all this quarantining.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Oh, great. Okay, great. We're gonna just dive into the questions. So what are your thoughts about the ongoing discrimination against people of color all around the world?
There's so many thoughts. I mean, first, like, it's a tragedy that in this modern day, we're still seeing so much hatred being spewed at all, like BIPOC people, Black, Indigenous people, and other people of color globally. And, it's even more troubling that it's not new, right? Like, these are not new things. This has been going on for centuries, but because of social media and because of we have all this digital access to different people around the world, we're able to spread the word in a way that we've never been able to spread it before. Mm-hmm. So that's a good thing. But I think it just troubles me that some people are just accepting this as truth and just, this is not new. And I feel like people need to know this is not new. And unfortunately, it's been going on for a long time. And so it's time that we really kick up our efforts in trying to stop it.
Yeah, I totally agree. Recognition is really important these days. So now you have told us that you have unfortunately experienced racism. Could you share more about that with our viewers and listeners?
Yes. So I think people have these preconceived notions about who someone is based on how they look, what their name is, where they may be from, how they present, in terms of how they dress or wear their hair or anything like that. And so as a dark-skinned Black woman with natural hair, I can't begin to count the number of racist experiences and microaggressions that I've experienced. Can I give a few short examples?
Yeah, sure, yeah.
So while I was in school, even as a child, but I'm thinking about more recently as an adult, I went back to school as an adult, and we're considered non-traditional students if you're over the age of 25. So, I was being fit for a play. I was a double lead in this play, and the costume designer / fitter said to me, "I bet you've never had a costume made for you before." And, it seems really simple, but had this person just taken an extra moment to really think about what it was that they wanted to get from me as information, they could have rephrased that as a question, like, "Hey, have you ever had a costume made for you before?" Or there were just a lot of assumptions put in that statement. And my mom is a seamstress, and my mom used to make costumes for my plays when I was a kid. And, I've been a lead in other shows. So it just kind of felt like there was all these assumptions about, here you are in this privileged school. You've probably never had an experience like this before. I went to a school, it's called Vassar College, and it's a small school upstate New York, but it's one of the top schools in the US. And sometimes people would hear where I went to school and would be shocked. Oh my goodness, wow, which is so offensive because, it's really hard to separate, if I was a white woman, would they have had the same surprise, or would they have said, good for you, that's a great school, instead of wow, really? And so one time I was in the doctor's office and I had on one of my t-shirts from my school, and my doctor said, "Oh, Vassar, did you go there?" And I said, "Yes." And she asked several times. She was like, "You went to Vassar?" And I was like, "Yes." And then she said, "Did you finish?" And I was like, okay, I talked to her about it afterwards, and her response was that she was like, no, I simply meant like, like, were you on vacation? Maybe you were just like, on break or something. But I feel like there was another way you could have asked that. You could have said, hey, like, what year did you graduate? Or like, have you graduated yet? Like, what's that look like? Or what are you doing after you graduate? Something else that wouldn't have sounded like, oh, you went there. Were you able to finish that? I don't know. And like the last example, I used to work in retail, and people, when you work in retail, sometimes like customers come in, and that idea that the customer is always right, people felt really entitled to say mean and nasty things because their assumption is that you have no right to say something back to them because the customer is always right. And people would make jokes or like give opinions about different people's names. And because my name is Alexandria, or at least my first name is Alexandria, I don't have that ethnic, assumption put behind my name. And so people would make jokes and assume that because I did not have one of these quote ethnic names, that I would just, side with them and think it was funny. And so it's just things like that put you in a position where you feel really uncomfortable. And I think it's very easy for people to see them as like small mistakes. I think sometimes people want to write it off like that's not what they meant, but it's more harmful to do that than to just simply like listen to the person who has experienced it and think about how that could have made them feel uncomfortable had it been them in that position.
Yeah. Well, it's really unfortunate to hear that you had to deal with racism, but like now you're speaking up about it and trying to make a difference with everybody. And so what advice do you have for people that are dealing with racism?
I would say that it's a tough question because it really will depend on your situation, like who you are, how you identify, and like what's going on in the situation. And I feel like I have different advice for BIPOC people and then for white people and hopefully allies. And so for BIPOC people, I would say that you should put your safety first and make sure whatever it is that you intend to do, that you prioritize your safety. And I would say try your best to not jump directly to like violence or physicality. I think it's very easy to get upset and want to do something physical. But again, this goes back to safety, and like you can get harmed. You might harm someone else in a way that you do not intend. And also you can lose your freedom or anything else, in trying to do that. And then I would say do your best to use your words to convey the issue, but be aware that this takes practice. And so unfortunately, racism is something that's been around, and it's probably not going to be the last time you experience something like this, but be kind to yourself and know that like you're not always going to say the right thing and you're not always going to get it right, but that you are valid in feeling, upset and feeling harmed. And then I would say for white people and allies that you need to speak up. If you see something going on, if you are witness to it, if you hear something that sounds just inappropriate, to speak up, because if no one condemns this like racist act or the words of the perpetrator, then they'll continue thinking that their behavior is acceptable. So those are my thoughts.
Yeah, same. So like because of George Floyd and then the recent hate crimes towards Asians because of the ongoing pandemic, that's why Sophia and I wanted to start this organization to like use our voices to let younger people know about these issues, and like somehow maybe in the future I will change how people view different cultures, like the BIPOC cultures, and hopefully they become allies too. Yeah, and so you've also recently spent time teaching middle and high school youth about financial literacy and art as is activism. So could you tell the listeners more about it?
Sure. So I have a degree in theater, and then I have another degree in drama and prison studies. And people would often and prison studies is like a subset of Africana studies. So just studying like Black people of the diaspora all around the world and different things that affect Black people. And so people would often say like, I don't understand how those two things go together. Like, why would you choose to study those two things? And so I had this opportunity to teach with a new virtual high school that opened last year. It's called Making Us Matter. And the class that I created was called Art as/is Activism. And it was intended to do just that, right? To blend history and current events and art and activism into this one topic where my students could see like themselves in their curriculum and then see like and understand how they can make a difference through their chosen like art form. And so, you know, we would do different projects. And so some people wrote poems, some people drew pictures, other people, you know, wrote songs. They did all kinds of things, but whatever their topic was that they felt, whether it was like body image or whatever the topic was, they were able to create something. And then, and then I also taught financial literacy, which to me was really important because as a young child, I didn't learn at home how to manage money and things like that. And I think it's very easy for people, if you don't have parents who know, then you won't learn that skill. Like that's not taught in school. So it was a really great opportunity to do that.
Yeah, I think that's amazing. Like, I wish my high school taught classes like that.
Yeah.
You also have a podcast called Interrupting Racism, which is amazing how you're using your platform to interrupt racism. You talk about experiences on racism and what it's like for Black women in America, and so much more, highlighting Black excellence. Why don't you talk more about your own podcast?
Thank you. Yeah, it's been a really exciting adventure. I had the idea for this podcast back in like late 2017 when I was still at school because it was a predominantly white institution. There were just a lot of unfortunate events that happened and just, you know, like racist and microaggression experiences. And so as a creative, I was thinking of ways that I could speak about my feelings and about these experiences. And I really wanted to create a community for other people who have experienced similar things and, you know, like around the world, like anywhere. If you've experienced this, like I want you to find community here. And then I really wanted to use it to educate other people about what, you know, these experiences and maybe stop them from doing the same kind of harm. And so, like you said, I speak about all kinds of topics that are related to race and racism, white supremacy, and gender inequality and things. Right now, it's being listened to in 19 countries, which is really amazing. So,
Oh, wow.
That's so cool.
Wow.
thank you.
Also, could you like elaborate a bit more on how youth can become allies and educate themselves regarding these ongoing issues?
Sure. So I think that there's so many ways to get involved. And like I said, with my class, I was trying to teach students that, you know, something as simple as writing a song or, you know, creating a poem or anything like that. Use your talents to make a statement. Maybe you'll start a club at school. Maybe you'll do something like you did and start an organization. And then, you know, now you've created a podcast. But if there's something that you feel strongly about, whatever is within your power, I think you should try and do something for that. And so I'm thinking about the power of social media, and you know, you can follow really great orgs like the Black Lives Matter org, or you can follow, you know, people like Ava DuVernay, who does combine like art and activism in a lot of the work that she does. Or you can follow like my podcast, like Interrupting Racism. Like people will post things that are entertaining or informative or just valuable, and you can really get to understand and maybe even be inspired. There's this social media post that I have on my page and I found somewhere that says, some people are posting on social media, some are protesting in the streets, some are donating silently, some are educating themselves, some are having tough conversations with friends and family. A revolution has many lanes, but be kind to yourself and others who are traveling in the same direction. Just keep your foot on the gas. And I think that really sums it up. Like whatever it is that you can do that.
Yeah.
Right. I think I definitely agree with what you said about like the power of social media. Like I've been getting a lot of comments from my peers saying that they're updated on the news because of social media, because like they're so relying on social media these days, especially because of COVID as well, because now everyone's like staying home more like often, I guess, and then they go on social media to like check what's going on, and like they saw like the protests going on, like in 2020 through their social media accounts. So yeah, the power of social media is like very huge.
And I also think that it's great that people use social media to raise awareness on these like ongoing issues, because they had the choice, do they want to use their voice or not, but they decided to, and I think that's like great that they did that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. There's so many things that I found out because I was on social media, and I'm like, I didn't know this was happening in some country across the world. And a simple repost is enough to get someone else to learn about it. Yeah.
So how important is it to you that you're able to share your opinions on racial inequalities? Like, how does that make you feel?
I think it's super, super important to me because, like I said, I've experienced racism since I was a child. And as a child, you know, you don't really have that much autonomy. There's not a lot that you feel like you can do. You know, society teaches us that like children, you know, we're small people and like, you know, we don't have a lot of power. But I think that was in my time. I think in these days, like in this day and age, that's not the truth. Like, and children and youth and you know, teens and things, young adults have a lot more tools in front of them. And so now that I've leaned into my creative abilities and I'm able to combine some of those frustrations, but like use my voice to highlight issues, it's really fulfilling. And so I'm really hoping that me coming forward and doing these things sparks a flame in other people, and it'll be like a chain reaction until eventually, like, there's so many people fighting racial inequalities and dismantling white supremacy that it crumbles the foundation of it. You know?
Yeah, we hope that happens someday too. That's why we wanted to contribute and like make a change a little, at least so that like one more person could see our organization and learn from it. So yeah, thank you. Finally, what message are you trying to send to your audience?
I think it's always so hard because sometimes I'm not sure who my audience is or who, like, I think my audience is really intended to be the community first, right? The BIPOC people first. And then second, like white people and other allies, just for them to be educated. But I think that none of us living on this planet today created the problem of racism or white supremacy, but it's no longer welcome here. And I think it is the job of white people who are the benefactors of racism. They have a duty to dismantle it by becoming allies and thwarting racism and white supremacy whenever it's in front of them and whenever they get an opportunity. And I want BIPOC people to have a right to tell their stories, to see themselves in other people, and, you know, to spread the word about this inhumane treatment, because our experiences are valid. And just because our reality is not that of someone else's doesn't mean that it is not real. So yeah, and then I just want to continue to interrupt racism until it just is quiet.
Yeah, that's amazing. You know, we started this podcast because we wanted everyone to share their experiences on racism, because some people might be too scared, not comfortable with sharing it, maybe because of like a traumatizing path. But like, because, you know, you and other people are like speaking about their experiences, they're realizing, oh, it's okay to like say something about what I experienced, because when I'm saying something, I'm letting other people know it's not okay. And that's making change around the world, which I think is amazing.
Yeah. I'm wondering, you know, you all started this because you were inspired by George Floyd, but as you spoke about, there's a lot of really terrible things happening in the Asian community. How does that affect you all? And like, have you had any experiences with racism? Yeah.
I think like personally living in Vancouver, where I live, it's like I've had a lot of privilege growing up because there's a very strong Chinese community here. So I've never felt very clearly like a minority. Like even in our school, we were talking about it last week being Multicultural Week, and at least half of our grade is like Asian. So I think like I felt very privileged that way, but definitely seeing it in the news, it's like scared me a lot because it feels closer to home when so many of these hate crimes have also happened in Vancouver. And so I think that like scares me a lot.
And for me, I thought it was not okay to see Asian grandma getting punched, just walking on the street just because she was Asian. Because I saw like a whole bunch of news of like these seniors all getting like spat on, and they were just being punched out of nowhere without any specific reason, just because of their race. Look Asian, right? So then they're like, oh, coronavirus. And then I did not feel that was okay at all. So that's when I was a bit frustrated. And then after, only time that I think I kind of experienced racism, although it may not seem obvious, is when like people at our school go like, oh, I beat Sophia in the exam and she's Korean, like she's yellow, you know? Like just because I'm Korean doesn't mean like, I guess there's like this stereotype that they're all Asians are like smart, but like, yeah, like those little statements are kind of discriminatory, and there's like, a lot of news that did not make me feel like it's right. So yeah.
And I think like not only like hate crimes against Asians, but hate crimes against all different races isn't okay. And that people should learn from their mistakes and grow from it, and like know that, you know what, I need to stop doing this, and I need to do something to like make change to the world. And sort of similar to Sophia, but like when I was younger, I don't know if this is really like experiencing racism, but it was kind of like discrimination because I got put into ESL because I was Chinese and they thought I wasn't good at English, even though I was born in Canada. And then after when I like spoke, they realized, oh, she can speak English well. So the next day I got put out of it. And I was younger though back then. So I was just like, oh yay, I'm out of ESL now. But then like thinking back to it, it really like made me sad that they thought I couldn't speak English well.
Yeah, that happened to me too.
Yeah,
I definitely think that's racism. Sorry. Sorry, Jenny. I didn't mean to step in.
Sorry.
No, I think that's racism, to assume that because of the way someone looks, that they're not going to speak English, when they could have just asked you to speak English and they would have found out that you did. So, yeah.
Yeah, right. For me, I lived in like several countries. I lived in Korea. I was born in Korea. I went to New Zealand when I was young, and I lived in Philippines for a while. Like I lived in Europe for a while, and now I'm in Canada. I've personally encountered and saw a lot of racisms. Typically when I was in New Zealand, there weren't a lot of Asians back in where I was living. So at the beginning, I was really offended. I was really upset. But then later on, I kind of got used to it and didn't really consider it. I didn't like really get offended as much as I used to back then. It was that like just being used to it, like getting used to racist acts was just really upsetting, because like it's not something that you should be getting used to. It's something that you should always get offended, because it's not something they should just like happen on daily basis. That was really huge thing for me, for my siblings and like Asian communities, because there are so many racisms and so many discriminations that was happening in that community. Now I'm like in Canada, I feel like there are more broadened Asian community. It's better, but I still like on a daily basis see racisms happening. So I feel like that's really upsetting.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you all for sharing that with me. I don't know if you were ready. I don't know if you expected me to ask that, but I'm glad you were able to share.
Really fun. Yeah, because we've all had our experiences with racism and we should share our experiences. So thank you so much for joining us on our podcast today. And we've had such a great time just talking about our experiences with racism, what we can do to stop it, and how we can make change to the world.
So if anyone would like to check out Alexandra's Instagram and listen to her inspiring podcast, we'll link that below. So thank you everyone who has tuned in to the end.
Yeah, stay tuned for next week's podcast episode. We have another special guest joining us who will be sharing their experiences with racism.
And as always, let's keep the conversation going.